بعد. Last night we began discussing the climate in Medina just before and soon after the passing away of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Having discussed first how the Shia emphasize the role of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam and how they seek to prove it from the Quran, we said we will then now look at how history played out in the absence of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. Now, before we get into this subject tonight, I just want to tie a few loose ends from what we said previously. One was the fact that I mentioned that Ibrahim alayhi salam had prayed to Allah that just as he was submissive to God, he wanted from his descendants an ummah that would be as submissive as him. A question that arises from that is that this ummah that Ibrahim was praying for could have been the prophets that came after him, because most of the Anbiya came after Ibrahim alayhi salam. The answer to that is that in those verses, if you notice, and this is not by coincidence, Allah includes Ismail in it. Ibrahim does not say, "Oh Allah, make me Muslim to you, submissive to you." He says, "Make me and Ismail, Rabbana ja'alna muslimayni lak," both of us. And then when he asks for progeny, he doesn't say وَمِن ذُرِّيَّتِي, he says وَمِن ذُرِّيَّتِنَا ummatan, from our dhurriya. Now when you look at the prophets and the Anbiya who came, all of them, or the majority, came from the descendants of Ishaq, not from the descendants of Ismail. So all the Anbiya, Musa and Isa and Zakaria and Yahya and Yaqub and Ishaq and Yusuf and Yunus alayhimus salam, they were all descendants of Ishaq. And these came to be known as from the Banu Israel, who were the Jews. The Arabs came from Ismail, and the prophets from Ismail are very few. Some count them as being only 4. They count Ismail himself and the Prophet Hud and Saleh and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Furthermore, in those same set of verses, Ibrahim also says, وَبَعَثْ فِيهِمْ Rasul, and amongst this community of Meccans, send a prophet here who will teach them the book and purify them. Which Allah responds to in Surah Al-Jum'ah by saying, هُوَ الَّذِي بَعَثَ فِي الْأُمِّيِّينَ رَسُولًا, that He sent amongst them a prophet who purified them and taught them the book. So when Allah answers the prayer, He answers it in full. He is talking about the people of Mecca where He sent a prophet. And therefore we must search for this ummatan muslimatan lak from the dhurriya of not just Ibrahim but also Ismail from these Arab descent. That was one. The other thing is, it was pointed out to me that towards the end of the lecture I mentioned in passing that the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam insisted that those who hold authority must be given authority on the basis primarily of being God-fearing, of having taqwa, not of having social standing or having the political acumen. And I mentioned in passing that Amir al-Mu'mineen's policy was, as soon as he got the Khilafat, he asked all the governors from the Umayyads and others to step down and appointed people who were pious. And he was advised against it and told to wait until his government has taken full hold. And in that passing mention, I mentioned Ammar Yasir and I mentioned Salman al-Farisi. So it was pointed out to me that Salman al-Farisi had actually passed away before the time of Imam Ali. As well was pointed out to me that when I mentioned Muawiyah being appointed by the second caliph in Syria, he was first preceded by his brother Yazid bin Abi Sufyan, who was his brother. Now, all this being true, though, it does not change the fact that the Umayyads came to power because they were brought into power by the early caliphate, and that Imam Ali alayhi salam tried to reverse this by putting in companions whose integrity and piety was of high standing. So when you read Nahjul Balagha, you will see all these letters where he demotes certain individuals and removes them from power and asks for others to come to power. Now, we continue from where we left, and I began discussing some of the policies of the first caliph, and I won't go into the details of exactly what happened just before the Prophet ﷺ passed away and the whole incident of Raziyat Yawmul Khamis and so on that I have alluded to. I had considered discussing in detail what exactly happened in Saqifa as well, but again I will just summarize it because I think this is something that we have heard time and time again. There is a Sunni narrative of what happened in Saqifa, and there is a Shia narrative of what happened in Saqifa. But the strength in the argument of the Shias, and we don't say this because we are Shia, is that the Shia argument is also drawing from sources that would be considered to be Sunni. These are not arguments, the narrative of the Shia is also coming from the same sources, but there are some reports that are being looked at by one group and not the other, and vice versa. In a lot of the Sunni narrative, and this is because the early scholars, in an attempt to keep the community as one and to show that there was no strife amongst the Sahaba of the Prophet, it is very sanitized, for lack of a better term, where it is portrayed that there wasn't so much conflict. And so the narrative is that when the Prophet ﷺ passed away, Umar ibn al-Khattab could not believe that the Prophet had passed away. He was very upset, and Abu Bakr showed up and he calmed him down, and he went inside and he saw the Prophet had passed away, and he kissed him and he said, "You are dearer to me than my mother and my father." And he went out, he calmed Umar. And this is now a narrative that I have taken from a very popular book called Muhammad by Martin Lings. And this book was a bestseller. It is written in a very narrative style. And very strangely, to us at least, he says Ali just withdrew to his house with Talha and Zubair. So when the Prophet passed away, Ali just went and withdrew to his house. And all the Muhajirun now gathered around Abu Bakr. And they found out that the Ansar were at a place called Saqifa Banu Sa'ida. The Ansar were two major tribes, Aus and Khazraj. And so very nicely the Muhajirun followed Abu Bakr and they went to this Saqifa, and the Ansar began speaking and presenting their case. And Umar wanted to speak, but Abu Bakr gestured to him and told him, don't say anything yet. And then he stood up and spoke, and he said to the Ansar that, look, the Prophet was from the Quraysh, and people will not accept anyone except one who is from Quraysh. The Ansar began saying, then why don't we choose one leader from us and one leader from you? To which Abu Bakr then said that you cannot have two swords in one sheath. This is not going to work. And then he took the hands. Now there were two dominant individuals who had gone to Saqifa with Abu Bakr. One was Umar and one was a man called Abu Ubaidah. Many of you have not heard of Abu Ubaidah, but if you read the history and what happened at Saqifa, he played a very dominant role. The scholar Wilfred Medlung, to whom I will refer to very frequently tonight, in his very well-known book, Succession to Muhammad, he says that after Umar passed away, the third caliph would have been Abu Ubaidah. But Abu Ubaidah passed away before Umar did. So, and he says they were very close. So Abu Bakr then took the hands of Abu Ubaidah and Umar, and he said to the Ansar, I give you a choice between these two individuals, Umar and Abu Ubaidah. Select one of them as your caliph. Then Umar objected and said, don't you know that the Prophet ordered Abu Bakr to offer prayers in his illness? And they said, yes. Then he said, then who amongst you would dare to take precedence over him? Then he took hold of the hand of Abu Bakr and said, I pledge allegiance to him. And Abu Ubaidah did the same. And then the Muhajirun one by one began doing bay'ah. And then the Ansar did that one by one. And then the next day, Abu Bakr led the Fajr prayers and he sat on the Prophet's pulpit. And then Umar rose and said, the best of you, the companion of the Prophet, Thani Athnain, the second of the two in the cave, pledge allegiance to him. And everybody pledged allegiance as a group. Ali bin Abi Talib did not, because he didn't happen to be at the mosque, he was at home, but then he pledged allegiance later on. And thereafter, the Prophet's family washed and shrouded the Prophet, and the companions came in groups one by one, and they prayed for the Prophet, and they buried him. And Medina felt very sad, and they rebuked each other for crying, because it was bid'ah to cry for someone who passed away. But they also were weeping amongst themselves, even as they told each other not to weep. And some of them said, "We are not weeping because he has died, but we are weeping because revelation has been cut off from us." Now this is the kind of narrative you get in a book like the one I mentioned by Martin Lings. The Shia say that this is, as I said, a sanitized version and an attempt to show that it was very peaceful and there were no issues. Now if you read the book by Madelang, Succession to Muhammad, he pulls out from multiple sources, from Sirah ibn Ishaq, Sirah ibn Hisham, Tarikh Tabari, Tabaqat ibn Sa'ad, and multiple sources. And he shows a very, very different picture. First of all, there was a fight going on. There was a lot of arguments. There was absolutely no respect for one individual over the other. In the Ansar, the tribe of Khazraj, they were led by a man called Sa'ad bin Ubadah, and the Khazraj were trying to have him elected. Abu Bakr and Umar Rashdin, the Ansar heard this argument from Abu Bakr that people will not accept anyone except the Quraysh, and they said, then if we have to elect a Muhajir, then we choose Ali, which was very interesting because he was not even there. Now, Zubair bin al-Awam was present. He pulled out a sword and there was a commotion. Umar grabbed the sword of Zubair, he struck it on a stone and he broke it. He called Zubair a dog. Now these are fully referenced with footnotes, you can go look it up. Then he pounced on Sa'ad bin Ubadah and he broke his ribs, and it was from these injuries that Sa'ad passed away. And then he grabbed hold of the hand of Abu Bakr and said, "I pledge allegiance to him." And the person next to him did that, and suddenly there was a scramble and everybody was paying allegiance. And then the Aus began paying allegiance, and the Khazraj now thought, if we don't, we'll get left behind. So they started doing it, and there was a lot of commotion. Now, which version do we believe? Because it ends up being he said, she said, and there are two narratives. Madelang says the proof of this argument is that all Muslims agree that when Umar became the caliph, he was asked about what happened in Saqifa. At that point, both Abu Ubaidah and Abu Bakr had passed away. Now, these are the words of the Caliph Umar. He said, "Wallahi inna amra bay'ata Abi Bakrin kanat faltatin." I swear by Allah, that affair of pledging allegiance to Abu Bakr was a mistake. He used the word falta, which is well known by all historians, that he called it a falta. فَوَقَ اللَّهُ أُمَّةً مِّن شَرِّهَا. Allah protected the ummah from the evil of what happened that day. And then he said, if anyone attempts to do a similar thing of what happened on Saqifa, I will have him beheaded. So this is accepted by Muslims, that at the very least he described it as a falta. Now, what we say as Shias here is that the Prophet ﷺ did not appoint Abu Bakr as a caliph. But the argument that is being held by our Sunni brothers and sisters is that the reason Abu Bakr was deserving of the Khilafah is that he led the prayers on the last days when the Prophet was ill. But here there's a couple of challenges. First of all, there is a lot of contradictory reports about this leading of prayers, even from the Sihah. There are reports to say that Aisha said, "Tell Abu Bakr," and Hafsa said, "Tell Umar." There are reports to say that Abu Bakr went to lead prayers, but when the Prophet found out, he immediately stood up even in all his illness, and he dragged himself to the mosque and asked him to step aside. There are reports to say that the Prophet went to the mosque, but he indicated to Abu Bakr to continue leading the prayers, but he just sat beside him, to which people then ask that if the Prophet had already indicated that Abu Bakr should lead the prayer, then why did he go to the mosque and just sit beside him? And so on and so forth. But if the reason to say that this is what would make him qualified to, or to indicate the hint that this is the one the Prophet wanted to be the leader, then there are other things that we could take that would give us even more indication of who was more deserving. For example, in those days that the Prophet ﷺ was ill, he appointed a young man called Usama bin Zayd bin Harith to lead and be the commander of his army. And he posted him outside Medina, and he asked all the Muslims to join the Jaysh of Usama. Now you as a Muslim, if you are reading two history narratives, and you know of one person that the Prophet most definitely appointed as a commander of the Muslim army and asked all the Muslims to join, and another narrative where there are multiple contradictory narratives of Abu Bakr going to lead prayers in the mosque, who in your opinion would you think is the Prophet most likely to have hinted to be the leader of the Muslims after? Furthermore, Muslims have other reports. They have reports, for example, that the Prophet ﷺ said, had there been a Prophet after me, it would have been Umar. Which then makes it very surprising that the Muslims did not remember this hadith when they were debating and arguing at Saqifa. There are many other such incidents that we can draw from. The other argument that is given is that Abu Bakr was not just a Sahabi, but he was the oldest of them in age, and therefore he was the most eminent. So the argument that is presented is that, look, Ali bin Abi Talib was very knowledgeable, but he was not mature. He was a young man in his 30s. He didn't have that sense of elderliness in the community to have commanded that respect to take on the leadership of the Ummah. Now, is age a factor? And there is a very interesting report, and I hesitate to say it because when I say it, it comes across as if we are trying to mock the Caliph Abu Bakr. But I say to you, my Sunni brothers and sisters, if you're listening to me online or in the audience, I say this without any sense of sarcasm, but this is in our books, that when Abu Bakr was elected, his father found out, Abu Quhafa, and people said to Abu Quhafa, congratulations, your son has become the Caliph of the Muslims. And he said, on what merits did my son deserve to be the Caliph of the Muslims? They said, oh, Abu Quhafa, he was chosen because of his age being the eldest. To which Abu Quhafa said, in that case, why did you not elect me? Because I am older than him. Now this is in our books, which means that you can see that even the father of Abu Bakr is not convinced with such an argument. Does the Quran have a criteria of who deserves to lead Muslims? Yes, it does. The children of Israel at one point were being persecuted, and they were under the leadership of a prophet who was called Ishmael, or in the Bible Samuel, I believe. And they came to the prophet and said, ask Allah to appoint for us a king who will lead us in war against our enemies. So the first thing we learn is that in the Sunnah of Allah, as handed down to the children of prophets and all, is they knew that if you need a leader, it is only God who appoints. You do not choose one amongst yourselves. So the Prophet says to them, perhaps you might not fight, you might not accept it. They said, no, why would we not go and fight when our women are oppressed and our children are oppressed and our old are oppressed and so on. So he prays to Allah, and Allah says, tell them, your leader and king will be Talut. Now Talut was a very poor man, he was a shepherd. And when they heard that Allah has made Talut their leader and their king to go and fight against Jalut. Jalut is the biblical Goliath. They protested this, and this is in the Quran, to say, on what merit does Talut deserve to be our leader when he is neither a rich man, nor does he have a social standing, nor is he one of our elders and leaders. He is just a poor man, a shepherd. Now the Quran says that Allah said to the Prophet, that tell them, Allah has chosen Talut because He has made him bastatan fil ilmi wal jism. He has endowed him with immense knowledge and physical strength. So you now begin to see that Allah has a certain yardstick. He has a certain mi'yar. And the Quran says, وَلَن تَجِدَ لِسُنَّةِ اللَّهِ تَبْدِيلًا. You will not find a change in God's practice and God's sunnah. His mi'yar says the same. So now if Muslims say the Prophet did not elect someone, if you really want to know who was the most qualified, look for amongst the ummah who was bastatan fil ilmi wal jism.
Muhammad wa ali Muhammad bulantar salawat.
Allah.
Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Shia and Sunni have this hadith that the Prophet ﷺ said, "A'lamukum Ali ibn Abi Talib." The most knowledgeable amongst you is Ali ibn Abi Talib. Ana madinatul ilm wa Aliyun babuha. And all Muslims acknowledge there was no one superior in knowledge to him. Knowledge of Quran, tafsir, everything the ummah has is from Ali. One of the greatest mufassir of Islam is Abdullah bin Abbas. Abdullah bin Abbas was a student of Ali bin Abi Talib. Whether it's Arabic grammar introduced by Ali, whether it is spirituality, all the Sufi tariqas, they go back to Ali. So Quran you look, Hadith you look, he is the only individual who dared to sit on a pulpit and say, Saluni, Saluni, qablan tafqiduni. Ask me whatever you want before you lose me. Right? So, he is the most knowledgeable. Then when it comes to courage and prowess and strength and physical strength, look at the history of Islam and give us the name of anyone who had more shuja'ah than Ali bin Abi Talib. Now very quickly, let's ask a few more questions. Now let's take the premise that the Prophet ﷺ never appointed a successor. And I've mentioned some of these points, but I will mention them very quickly. We ask this question, why would the Prophet not have appointed a successor? Number one, why is it that the Prophet never thought that this would cause an issue in the Ummah, but the Muslims realized immediately that this will cause an issue even before he was washed and buried? Number two, the Prophet ﷺ was ill for 4 days and everyone knew he was dying. Why did no one ask him? Number three, the Prophet ﷺ announced several months before at Ghadir that he is leaving, and in Medina that Jibreel came to me and recited the Quran twice to me and therefore I'm leaving you. Why did no one ask him, whom should we follow? Number four, why did the Prophet ﷺ also not say that I am not appointing anyone for reason X or reason Y, or that Allah has said to me don't appoint anyone? Number five, whatever reason Allah and His Messenger had for not appointing, if we look at the condition of the Ummah then and now, do you think that their vision was a good one and that it bore fruit and turned out exactly as Allah and His Messenger had expected? Out of the 4 khulafa that the Muslims call Khulafa ur-Rashidun, 3 of them were murdered. The 2nd Caliph, the 3rd Caliph, and the 4th Caliph. And as a result of that, the Khawarij came to be. And the Khawarij were as brutal as, for example, ISIS today. The Khawarij would, for example, stab a pregnant woman in the stomach with a spear, right? We have such incidents. It was the same idea of beheading and abuse, comparable. People have compared these 2 groups. So, Allah and His Messenger bring the final religion, the best religion, the final revelation, the final prophet, and then don't appoint anyone. They must have had some vision of how this ummah will continue. When we look at the history of Islam, even in the early days when all these early caliphs were being murdered, and how different groups rose, and divisions and fights, to the state of Muslims today, would you say that their vision is continuing to grow in the right direction and in bearing the fruit that was expected by them? Now, Muslims have reasons that they offer to say why the Prophet did not appoint. But when I give you these reasons, I want you to keep in mind, it's not based on any proof from the Prophet. It's just guessing. They're guessing that this may be why the Prophet did not appoint a successor, and I'm going to take only 2 reasons. One was the fact that the Prophet ﷺ did not want to establish a tribal system of hereditary inheritance. Whoever the Prophet would appoint, then after him his son would come, and his son would come, and it would be a tribal thing, or his brother would come. The second reason is that Islam was a religion, not a political or a governing system. So the Prophet just came to deliver a message. He came, he delivered a message, he gave us the Quran, and then he went away. Now, governing, ruling was left to the Muslims to decide how they will govern themselves while following the teachings of Islam. Now, on the first argument, that the Prophet did not appoint a successor because he did not want to establish a tribal system, we ask the following questions. First of all, did that plan of the Prophet succeed? It didn't, because the Umayyads came to power very shortly after Imam Ali. And then the Abbasids came, and then the Ottomans came. And to this day we have monarchies in the Middle East and different families ruling. So that plan that I am not going to appoint a successor because it will lead to tribalism utterly failed, because that's exactly what happened. Number two, Abu Bakr at Saqifa argued with the Ansar that you cannot be the leaders because the Prophet was from Quraysh, and therefore people will not accept anyone except one who is from Quraysh. This is a tribalistic argument, is it not? And when Imam Ali was told that Abu Bakr was elected in Nahjul Balagha, he said, on what basis did the Muhajirun argue against the Ansar? He was told they argued on the basis that they have a greater right because they are from the Quraysh and the Prophet is from the Quraysh. To which Imam Ali said, they fought for the tree but they spoiled the fruits. Meaning you fought for Quraysh on the basis that you are Quraysh, therefore you have a greater right, but you didn't come further down, line the tree and say the Prophet is also Banu Hashim. Therefore, if that is the argument, then the leader should have been from the Banu Hashim. Now, the third thing is, the Prophet ﷺ could also stop tribalism by electing someone who was not from Quraysh, if he really wanted to stop tribalism. But he didn't do that either. Fourthly, if the Prophet would have elected someone from his family and from a tribe like Quraysh, why do we conclude that the Sahaba would have rejected it? Were they not the most obedient and the best of this ummah? And would they not have concluded that if the Prophet elected someone from a particular tribe, even if it's own family, then this is a command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and they must submit to it? So this argument that Allah did not want, or the Prophet was afraid it will cause tribalism, does not hold water. As for the second argument, that Islam is only a religion and it wasn't meant to be a governing system and political system, I will talk about this in more detail inshallah 2 nights from now. But we just ask again here to say that if governing is not tied to religion, then why do Muslims constantly try to establish Islamic states? That would be a bid'ah. And secondly, why then do we say that one who dies without an imam dies the death of jahala? Man mata bi ghayri imamin mata mitatul jahiliyyah. Because once the Prophet delivered the message, now the Prophet doesn't intend for Islam to be a government. Anyone can rule and respect the values of Islam, but there shouldn't be a need that you must pay bay'ah and allegiance to someone. So again, that does not hold water, and we shall talk about this in more argument. Another thing for Muslims to consider is that when you look at the life of Imam Ali alayhi salam, you see from the time he was a youth and a child, he was very active in Islam. He was at the forefront and he was the closest to the Prophet throughout his life. As soon as the Prophet ﷺ passed away, he disappeared from Muslim history for 25 years. Our question is that if he had pledged bay'ah to the early caliphs, why is he not to be seen playing an active role in the promotion and spread of Islam? During the time of the early caliphs, the Muslims took Syria, they took Egypt, they went out to different regions, Persia, so on. Why is Imam Ali not there at the forefront doing jihad, spreading Islam, supporting the caliphs? Why has he vanished until he becomes the caliph? Now, I want to end this discussion by saying There is an irony to this whole discussion. And that irony is that those who say that Allah did appoint a successor, i.e. the Shi'as, they mention only one name, Ali bin Abi Talib. There is no Muslim sect that says the Prophet appointed a successor and they name anyone else other than Ali bin Abi Talib. Anyone who says the Prophet did appoint a successor, he only mentions or she only mentions Ali bin Abi Talib. So if we go on the basis that the Prophet did appoint someone, the only name that is given to us is Ali bin Abi Talib. And those who say that the Prophet wanted the Muslims collectively to decide who should be their leader, when we look at the history of all the Khulafa, there is only one individual that was collectively selected by the Ummah, and that was Ali bin Abi Talib. Abu Bakr was elected by a small group in a closed door meeting. Umar was elected by Abu Bakr on his deathbed. Uthman was elected through Ashura. Ali bin Abi Talib was not elected by one or two or a group. The whole Ummah thronged him and insisted, and for 3 days he kept them on hold, and they did not leave his door until he accepted to be the caliph. After him, no one was elected like this. Not Muawiyah, not Yazid, not anyone else. Which therefore means that if the Prophet wanted to elect someone, and he did appoint someone, that was Ali bin Abi Talib. And if the Prophet wanted the Ummah collectively to get together and appoint someone, then the only person the Ummah ever elected was Ali bin Abi Talib. So whether you believe the Prophet elected someone or didn't elect someone, your only candidate is Ali bin Abi Talib. Food for thought. Now, we come to the history of the Khulafa, which was what I really wanted to discuss tonight. And what I want to do here is not essentially make a laundry list of all the things the Shia object to with regards to the early caliphs and basically say this is why we distance ourselves from these caliphs and this is wrong and this is wrong and this is wrong. In fact, where I can, I want to give them the benefit of the doubt and say perhaps this is what they were trying to do. But the reason for narrating this is to say that when the Ummah left the door of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam and they decided choosing whoever they thought was the most fitting, sincerely or for any other reason, because these were fallible beings, the decisions they made not only caused harm to the Ummah at the time, but there were downstream effects of that which Muslims now pay the price for even today. Tomorrow I will discuss the history of Muslims at a much later phase, not in the early Khilafah. And then day after, inshallah, on the night of Ashura, I will talk about the challenges that Muslims face today, Shia and Sunni. And again, you will see that some of this is left over through decisions made by those who led Muslims in the early stages. What I have done is, I have picked and categorized 3 major issues that the Shias highlight with each one of the 3 caliphs. I don't need to discuss issues related to the Umayyads and Abbasids because the crimes and the tyranny of the Banu Abbas and Banu Umayyah is there before all the Muslim Ummah. The point where Muslims have a lot of polemic arguments and where there is a lot of sensitivity and where unfortunately we don't have respectful discussions is around the issue of the Khulafa al-Rashidun, the first 3 caliphs that the Muslims call Khulafa al-Rashidun. And this is where it is very sensitive and the discussions is walking on eggshells to be careful not to offend anyone, or it is done in a reckless manner that causes more harm than good. So I want to be respectful, but I want to highlight the issues. So I've picked 3 major aspects. With regards to the Khilafah of the first Caliph, Abu Bakr, I have already mentioned actually these 3 things, but I just want to mention a few points on them. The first issue that Shias found to be problematic is the fact that the Prophet ﷺ had fortified and built strength with the Ansar and the Muhajirun in Mecca. And what Abu Bakr did was, as soon as he took power, he brought back the leaders of the Quraysh in Mecca who had just converted to Islam 2 or 3 years before, and in many cases just surrendered really. And he brought them back and gave them positions of power and authority. This completely marginalized the Ansar and took them away from the political scene and shattered that sense of ukhuwa and brotherhood and sincerity and God-fearingness that had existed in Medina. Now, we need to ask ourselves, why would he have done that? Because he was in Medina. He was not with the Quraysh who had surrendered and so on and so forth. Wilfred Medlung, and if there's one book you should read through this whole discussion that I'm having on Orthodox Islam, it is this book you should consider reading. Wilfred Medlung's Succession to Muhammad. It's printed by Cambridge University Press. It is a heavy reading, 400 pages plus, small print. If you like that sort of reading academic, it's definitely worth your time. He says that in Saqifa, the Ansar and Abu Bakr had disagreed on who should be the leader. So the Ansar were not supportive of Abu Bakr even though they gave him bay'ah. The Banu Hashim as well were opposed to him. Now without support from the Banu Hashim and the Ansar and some of the prominent Muhajirun who are close to Ali bin Abi Talib, Abu Bakr did not have the support to carry out whatever he wanted to do with the government that he was putting in place. And therefore, he now needed to reach out to those who had some social standing and some political experience that could help him undertake whatever he sought to undertake. And therefore, he brought in the Banu Makhzum and Banu Abdul Shams from the Quraysh. These were the two most powerful tribes. It is from this Banu Makhzum and Banu Abdul Shams that he brought in people and made them commanders of his army. People like Khalid bin Walid, people like Ikrimah bin Abu Jahl, people like Yazid bin Abu Sufyan, people like Sa'id ibn al-As, and they became initially the commanders of his army when he went after the tribes in the outskirts who were not paying their zakat. You remember I mentioned the Ridda wars, Hurub Ridda. And after those were over, he then made them commanders who went out on expeditions to conquer Syria, Egypt, and other lands. And obviously, once they took on these positions, their role continued to grow within the Muslim community. And that of the original Ansar began to shrink. I want to mention some very quick examples of the crimes of some of these individuals, like Khalid bin Walid. Khalid bin Walid was sent by Abu Bakr to go and fight some of these tribes who were not paying zakat. And amongst them was a tribe that was led by a very eminent nobleman that was called Malik bin Nuwaira. Malik bin Nuwaira was very well respected, but he had opposed initially Abu Bakr, and then he surrendered and agreed and said he would pay zakat. Now, when Khalid bin Walid came to this place where Malik bin Nuwaira was with his tribe, they had an argument, and we are told Malik bin Nuwaira's wife went and pleaded with Khalid bin Walid to spare her husband. It so happened that Malik's wife was considered to be one of the most beautiful women of Arabia, and there are different names for her, one of which is Layla, and there are other names. Her fame and repute of her beauty and her grace was well known in Arabia, that there were very few women who were as beautiful as the wife of Malik bin Nuwaira. And some reports say that when she went to plead to Khalid bin Walid, her face was uncovered and her hair was disheveled, and he saw her. The moment Khalid bin Walid saw her, Malik bin Nuwaira said, "Alas, now I shall die, and I shall be killed because of the beauty of this woman." And Khalid bin Walid said, "You are a kafir, you must be killed." Malik bin Nuwaira said, "I am a Muslim." He read the Shahada. But Khalid bin Walid had him beheaded. And once he was beheaded, he said, "Now I shall marry her," and he married her the same night. Muslims were very upset by this, because by Islamic law, a woman has to observe the period of iddah before she can be married. Furthermore, this was a forceful marriage, so indeed it wasn't even a sin that was consensual, it was actually an abuse of a Muslim woman. The Muslims were extremely upset by this. Some of them even left Khalid bin Walid. When this army came back, we are told that Umar was furious about this. And he asked Abu Bakr to have Khalid bin Walid put to death. But Abu Bakr left Khalid bin Walid. And he said that even Wahshi, when he tore the stomach of Hamza at Uhud, so that his liver may be chewed, the Prophet forgave Wahshi. And therefore I forgive Khalid bin Walid. Now, the reason for that we don't know. Perhaps because, now, if a Shia was to guess this, he would say that Khalid bin Walid was a commander who would have been useful in other conquests. But whatever the reason may be, this is very early in the days of Islam, when Muslims are witnessing a system that in their opinion is not just. So there were many incidents like this. If you have the time, go look up another incident regarding a man who was called Fujat Salmi. Fujat Salmi was a man who disobeyed Abu Bakr. He plundered some wealth, and when he was caught and brought to Abu Bakr had him burnt alive to death. And we're told that when he was dying, the things that Abu Bakr, he mentioned 3 things that he regretted doing. And amongst the things that he regretted doing was having burnt Fujat Salmi alive. So there are many such incidents that took place. So the first thing that we show concern about is the fact that the first Khilafat brought these Quraysh back into the Ummah and gave them roles when they were not worthy of these roles. The second issue was the fact that the household of the Prophet's importance was downplayed. And I mentioned the incident of Fadak last night. And the third incident was the change in policy of how the Prophet ﷺ functioned, such as the collection of zakat, where the Prophet did not force and go to war to collect taxes from the Ummah. And even the Caliph Umar was surprised at the approach that Abu Bakr took to say, we will go to war, but we will collect the taxes. This started a precedence where the Caliph can change the policy of the Prophet ﷺ in how the government functions and how it is run. Now very quickly, we go to the Khilafat of the Caliph Umar. With the Khilafat of the second Caliph, there were 3 issues that we point out. The first issue that we show as concerns as Shias is that it is very clear from the books of history that the Caliph Umar discriminated between Arabs and non-Arabs. And he was concerned that there should not be a dynastic rule. He did not want to establish a tribalist rule, but he also did not want to promote the non-Arabs. And that put him in a bind, because then the Arabs were the Quraysh. Madelung says that by the time Muawiyah and Amr ibn al-As came to power, they essentially put a definite end to the early companions ruling and the non-Arabs. Umar did not only restrict non-Muslims from entering Medina. He had a policy where Muslims who were not Arabs were also restricted from entering Medina. Now this I'm saying with references to history, and I can't provide all the references now, but you can look them up or ask for them after. When Umar was struck, he was struck by a Persian called Abu Lu'lu. And we are told in the books of history that he accused Ibn Abbas and his father, and he told them, it is because of your eagerness to multiply the Muslims with non-Arabs that this has happened. I was struck by Abu Lu'lu, and he was accusing them that you have encouraged all these non-Arabs to become Muslims, and now look at what has happened. Abdullah ibn Abbas said to him, I will do with them whatever you command. To which he said, it is now too late. How can you now do anything with them when these non-Arabs have now learned to speak the Arabic language and the language of their masters, and they now pray salat with the Arabs, and they share in the acts of devotion with the Arabs. And before he died, he ordered that any Arab who was a slave of the state, they should be freed. Now, some historians say that in fact it was this policy of being against the non-Arabs that infuriated Abu Lu'lu, which is why he attacked Umar. And in retaliation, the son of Umar, one of the sons of Umar, who was called Ubaidullah, is reported to have said that he would have killed any non-Arab that he could find in retaliation for his father's death. Now, I quote a passage here from Medlang. Medlang says, "Yet it was in reality the Khilafat of the Quraysh conceived and founded by Abu Bakr that in spite of its lack of Quran legitimization, that now became the essential institution of Islam upheld by the Sunni creed." These are his words. He is arguing that the Khilafat that Muslims had was the Khilafat of the Quraysh, that before the Khilafat of the Banu Umayyah, there was a Khilafat of the Quraysh. And this was institutionalized and conceived by Abu Bakr, even though it had no legitimacy on the argument of the Quran. Then he says, Umar's attempt to Islamicize this institution by trying to base it on Quranic principles like the principles of Shura and Sabiqa was doomed to failure almost immediately after his death. Not much later, a dynastic succession came to prevail, and this was a development that Umar had dreaded. The reason for the failure of Umar's reform is easily discernible. The principle of merit in Islam was in latent conflict with the privileged status of Quraysh. What he's saying is that Umar did not want a dynastic rule. He tried to Islamicize this Khilafat of Quraysh by saying, we will hold a shura and we will give importance to those who became Muslims first and so on. But he says this was doomed to failure. Why? Because the very fact that the Quraysh were given a privileged status, that was completely in opposition to the principle of who gets merit in Islam. And then he finally says, in order to institutionalize the principles of merit and shura, Umar would have had to repeal the supreme status of the Quraysh. And this was an attempt that he was hardly in a position to take, even if he had contemplated it. The domination of the Arabs over the non-Arabs on an ethnic basis was also in essential conflict with the universal call of Islam. What he's saying is that Umar could not have Islamicized this institution because he had put in also a policy where the Arabs were more important than the non-Arabs. And that in itself was against the universality of Islam. So he could not have then Islamicized it. And if you look at the history of Muslims now, if we talk of downstream effect, you will see that discrimination in Muslim Ummah of Arabs against non-Arabs continues to this day. You go to the Middle East, anywhere, go to Saudi Arabia, go to Kuwait, go to UAE, go to anywhere, go to Qatar, go wherever you want. Some of you have lived there. You can clearly see that there is this discrimination, even if you are a Sunni Muslim. If you are a Sunni Muslim who is a Pakistani or an Indian or anyone who is non-Arab, you are discriminated against not on the basis of your faith or your wealth, but on the fact that you are not Arab. It is very clear. So, even when they establish a kingdom, they don't just say, Mamlakatu Saudiya. No, it is Mamlakatu Arabiyatu Saudiya. So that idea of Arab, and if time had permitted, then tomorrow night when we talk about this, we would talk about how Muslims in the later days after the First and Second World War, they first started to think we need to revive Islam, and they started this pan-Islamism movement. And when that failed, they tried to do what is pan-Arabism. When they got together as countries and tried to fight Israel and lost that war, and for a long time they kept drumming this idea of Arabs are one, and that came first over being Muslims. It is only now that you're seeing cracks in that whole thing with Qatar and opposition to the other Arabs and so on. But this issue continued in Muslim Ummah and this mindset. And we see that when Ali bin Abi Talib became the caliph, this was one of the things that he opposed severely. Now I want to mention the two other points very quickly with regards to the Caliph Umar. The other thing that is concerning to the Shi'as is that one of the policies of the Caliph Umar was that he banned the recording of hadith. And this proved to be a great disaster for Islam. Why? Because Muslims were not allowed to record hadith, and whatever they recorded was burnt. And for several decades, they did not record hadith. By the time they woke up to the need that we are losing what the Prophet said and did, and his sunnah, a lot of the Sahaba were dying. And so now the information was not there. And that created a whole industry where people would take money to write hadith. And then political parties and governments hired people and paid them to forge hadith in their interest. The problem of hadith being forged and all this issue of sahih, not sahih, and checking and transmission and ilmul rijal and ilmul hadith, it became a huge issue because Muslims did not record the sayings and traditions of the Prophet in the early days. And we have to be fair and say that this was single-handedly banned by the second caliph. Now, a well-known Sunni scholar, Professor Muhammad Zubair Siddiqui, who was a professor in Calcutta University, he has a very nice book called Hadith Literature. And in this book, he gives evidence in hadith to say that when the Caliph Umar was not sure, should I allow hadith recording or not, he pondered on it for 1 month before deciding he is not going to allow hadith to be recorded. The Shias have their own story as to why he would not have allowed hadith to be spread, but we will not go into that. But what Professor Siddiqui says is, he says the fact that Umar had to think about it for a whole month is proof that he could not find any authentic hadith from the Prophet forbidding the recording of hadith. And at the end of that, he said, I am concerned that if Muslims start recording hadith and giving importance to it, they will neglect the Quran. And therefore he banned hadith. So again, we can't discuss it in detail, but this was the second issue. So these are some of the issues that the Shi'as raise. And I have run out of time, so I will not discuss the 3 points regarding the Caliph Uthman, but I will try and summarize them tomorrow night, inshallah. And a few points as well, just to mention on the Khilafat of Imam Ali as well, I will try and mention to say how he then disagreed with some of these changes and the attempts that he made to reverse what was there by his predecessors. And we see very clearly that at the Shura, that I will try and talk about tomorrow if time permits, that amongst the 6 people that the Caliph Umar had appointed in the Shura to decide who amongst them will be the Caliph, there came a point where the deciding factor was left to one of them who was called Abdul Rahman bin Auf. And Abdul Rahman bin Auf first went to speak to Imam Ali before he went to speak to Uthman. And he said to Imam Ali, I am willing to say that you should be the Caliph if you agree that you will operate on the Quran, on the Seerah of the Prophet, and the Seerah of the Shaykhain. And Imam Ali alayhi salam is reported to have said, I will operate only on the Quran and the Seerah of the Prophet. If the Seerah of the Shaykhain is according to the Quran and the Seerah of the Prophet, then I will already be adopting it. And if it is in contradiction to the Quran and the Seerah of the Prophet, then I cannot adopt it. And Abdul Rahman bin Auf knew that Imam Ali will not lie. If he has said this, he will not do it. And it is on this reason then he opted to put forward the name of Uthman. So we will see some of the policies that Imam Ali tried to reverse, inshallah, very quickly tomorrow night. I want to conclude as well to say that our push here is not to disparage the Sahaba or to speak ill of them. And I know I've spoken more about the early caliphs here. But in particular, when we talk about the Umayyads and the Abbasids and others, our issue of concern here is that that definition of Sahaba being very broad and saying anyone who saw the Prophet, and also that simplistic approach to Islam where we say, if Abu Sufyan said, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, he's a Muslim. If Abu Talib, we do not have any record to say he said it, then he is a kafir. That needs to change. We need to be more discerning as Muslims to say, let us look at their history and their actions. Someone sent me a clip just before the 12 days of Muharram. It was a gathering, a lecture in a Sunni mosque, and some of you may have seen this. And there was a Sunni Imam who was speaking, and in his speech he was talking of history, and he started talking about Abu Talib. And he kept mentioning Abu Talib, and he kept saying Hazrat Abu Talib, Hazrat Abu Talib. And in his audience, there was an individual who had Wahhabi leanings. You may have seen this clip. And he started objecting to him. Don't say Hazrat for Abu Talib. To a point where they had to ask him to leave the mosque. And when he left, God bless this Sunni Imam. He was very passionate He was almost in tears. He said to his audience, he said, if I knew this is the kind of people you have in your mosque, I would not even have accepted your invitation. He said, what have we become as an ummah, that if we say Hadrat for someone like Abu Talib, people are objecting. But for Yazid, we cannot even do his la'nat, and we have to say radiyallah for him. Is this what the ummah has become? And then he goes into a detail, and he praises the contributions of Abu Talib. That Abu Talib did not declare his shahada, but does that mean that he was not a Muslim? He recited the aqdun nikah of the Prophet. How can a kafir recite the marriage of your Prophet? So when I talk about these issues, it is not to divide the ummah. It is not to cause pain to my Sunni brothers and sisters. It is merely to say that this is how the world sees us, and this is the Shia perspective, so that we may have a dialogue. And if we are mistaken, we welcome a similar discussion from a Sunni perspective, to say, look, from a Sunni perspective, this is how we see Islam, and this is how we explained those who led Islam, and this is why we believe this is the right approach, and this is Orthodox Islam. So the principles of Adala and Imama continue to come into play. But we must continue as Muslims to have this dialogue, as opposed to being resentful and saying, you know, this is nothing but a discussion to disparage those that are eminent and those that we look up to. But rather to reopen the books of history and once again look at it with discerning eyes and find where it is we lost the path. And we will find that the path that is clear before us is the path of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad alayhim afdalus salatu wassalam. Muhammad wa Ali